Hi, and welcome to our Lean In program. I'm Michael Linke, General Manager here at the Institute of Architects, and it's fantastic to have you join me again today. The design and construction landscape is changing. To keep up, practices must adapt and reevaluate the way that they specify in order to remain compliant. The old way of using Word-based documents is no longer really sustainable. So as the world turns digital, so must our specifications. Especially with the rise of remote working, CHT Architects have embraced Nbs Chorus to work faster, to collaborate better, and most importantly, remain compliant with ever-changing industry standards. So today's session, we're going to learn how CHT Architects have made the move to in-house digital specification and how the positive impact has helped them on their workflow and especially their specification process. So joining me today is Joe Healy. Joe is a specifications and BIM integration specialist at Nbs Australia. Joe originally is from the UK, is a qualified architectural technologist and has worked on historical renovations and stadium conversions in central London with EPR Architects. Then went over to the Middle East for a few years and worked on high-end hotels, residential skyscrapers, and a high-profile theme park in the Middle East. And then Joe moved to Australia and joined Cox Architecture here in Melbourne and has been working on residential towers, Sydney Football Stadium and a number of other projects. For the past 18 months, Joe has been at Nbs Australia and he's been helping the profession to integrate digital specification writing alongside Revit and ArchiCAD modelling. Alongside Joe, we're really pleased to welcome to our session today Mark Sprague. He's a director at CHT Architects. He's very much a design-focused architect with a strong track record of delivering successful projects across multiple sectors in the UK, Australia and Asia. Mark leads CHT's major projects from the initial design phase through to completion, and his other areas of focus at CHT are design management, feasibility, mentorship and sustainable design. Joining Mark as well is Nathan Byron. Nathan is a senior associate at CHT and he heads up CHT's specifications team, so he'll be joining us on the program. So Mark, Joe, Nathan now join me on the Lean In today. Gentlemen, fantastic to have you with us. Welcome to the program. Over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks very much for the introduction. Hopefully you can see the screen we've got shared here. We have a few slides coming up just about Nbs, a few things about Corus and Source, which we can present to you. And then following a bit of a look into the projects that Mark and Nathan do at CHT Architects. And then we branch into a bit of an interview style with lots of questions about how they've used Nbs Chorus and how they're aiming to use that in the future with various projects coming up. So this first slide you can see, apologies, you might be able to hear a little baby screaming in the background. Nbs started back in the UK in about 1973. It's hugely influential in the world of architectural specifications and particularly Uniclass. Following the expansion of the business into Canada and Australia in 2019, that was focusing around Nbs Chorus, which is the specification writing platform. We then launched Nbs Source in April 2020, which is the manufacturers and products selection integration, allowing specifiers to accurately import their products and all of that technical data directly into specs. Nbs then acquired SCL Schumann in 2020 with its specification software tool EasySpec, and Nbs also acquired SpecPack content, which is now fully available on the platform, along with SpeedSpec. So we cover just about every size of building project in terms of content depth. So at Nbs, we're certainly building for the future in terms of connectivity and efficiency of construction information all the way through the entire building life cycle. So what I'd like to jump onto now is just a quick overview of Nbs Chorus, as you can see on the left, and Nbs Source on the right. So Nbs Chorus is the actual specification writing platform. It's a collaborative, cloud-based specification for architects, engineers, and specifiers. So there's a few points to really focus in on, particularly the faster, more efficient specifying, because you know plenty of people jumping into the platform at the same time, inviting consultants or even clients to take a look at your specification. There's real-time collaboration between all those people on the project, so it's very handy to be able to speed up the actual production of specifications. And of course, the connectivity is really handy with models. So we have a plugin for Revit, ArchiCAD, and Vectorworks. And what that does is take the information from the spec, some of the parameters there, and put it directly into your model objects. Then you can call that out on annotations and schedules. So it's really handy to have that connected information between the spec and the schedules and the drawings instead of the separated documents we often currently work on. On the right-hand side, Nbs Source, that's the integration of manufacturers and products. You can browse detailed product listings select and compare products, or even leave your favorites. And then it's the direct product linked directly into your Corus spec, which CHT have been using. In terms of the future of specifications, 3 items I think it's important to focus on. As I mentioned, the integration of the model objects to specs, that's using associations. So that pushes the information from your spec, whether it's the title and the code. Then we also offer prefix and suffix options where you can build in your own in-house codes, and that pushes into model objects. Then you're, of course, embedding the data into those models, and it makes it a far stronger model to be able to take information from there. The products with the instant specification of pre-verified products. So that's Nbs Source, where we've worked with a number of manufacturers to pre-verify the products that they want to show on the platform. So you know that when you're taking that into your spec, it's fully verified and it's going to be exactly as you need it when you bring that down into Corus. And then, as I said, collaboration with projects and masters is set up in a way that allows you to build your live projects, but have masters as your kind of saved content, where you have your protected content up there, ready to bring down into projects when you need. Your masters can be whole systems or products or individual typologies of buildings, so plenty of options there. And the spec notes function is really handy for discussing the product particulars as you go along, and swapping notes there, and having lots of tracking options for who has done what and when. So as you can see with the bottom 3 diagrams, we have the integration with the models. The small windows you might be able to see here, that's the actual plugin from Nbs Chorus, and that allows you to push the data from that specification at the same time as you're looking at the model, and it puts it into the object parameters. So really handy to see that. Just a note on a few of our current subscribers. There's over 150 practices using Nbs Chorus at the moment. Not enough space that I could put them all on here, but there's plenty of subscribers who are using it in different innovative ways as well. So it doesn't always have to be exactly as we demonstrate. It's really good to see subscribers using the platform in their own way, and taking the sort of technological integration to the next level. So at this point, I'll hand over to Mark and Nathan for a bit of a rundown of CHT Architects, and we'll look at some of their projects and get into the interview. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, CHT have been operating for just over about 20 years out of Melbourne here in Australia. We've got about 80 staff in our Melbourne office. We do have an office in Penang in Malaysia as well, with about 20 architects over there. We're a mix of architects, interior designers under the banner of Sora, and we've now also created an industrial design arm as well, doing everything from furniture, lighting, and all sorts as well under the name of Detail. So very much a collaborative design house. We are, I think maybe jump on the next slide there, Joe. So we are across a broad variety of sectors. Probably our largest sector at the moment in Australia is mixed use and multi-residential. So we're seeing a lot of apartments. We're probably active in around up to about 5,000 apartments per year. So it's a big percentage of our workflow. In addition to that, we can jump on the next one. Joe. In addition to that, a lot of aged care and seniors living projects over the last few years. There's a lot of, I guess, inherent learnings from each of these sectors that we sort of tried to carry on and cross over from sector to sector. In addition to these jobs, we do a lot of commercial work. Got a few office projects underway at the moment, which will be on the next slide there, Joe. And following on from that as well, we are involved in quite a lot of build-to-hold projects as well, sort of including build-to-rent and hotels as well, which we have several under construction at the moment. So Nathan has been actively involved in sort of integrating Nbs into our workflow, looking at these specific sector types, so developing specific specifications for each of these areas of architecture, I've been sort of more involved in, I guess, the design process of projects. So it's been an interesting process bringing NBS in, not just looking at it at the back end, which was typically when you'd be looking at your sort of specification component of the project life cycle, but also seeing how that's now with the ease and access of information, how that's actually enabling us to change the way we think about design as well at the very outset of the project.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Mark. So we have a few questions. Obviously, we've set up just previous to this discussion, just to outline how you've been involved with using Corus. So you just kind of covered our question one there with your description of some of the projects you guys are involved in. My next question is, how did CHT find out about Nbs Chorus, and what has been the impact so far in your office?
Yeah, I used NBS a little bit in my time in the UK from sort of mid 2000s-ish. I think NBS actually was created in my hometown originally, so it was was quite broadly used with the firm that I was working with at the time, and as we've sort of moved more and more into the digital realm and BIM modeling and everything, we thought it was the right opportunity to sort of bring that on board here in Australia.
Good. Yes, next question. How did you find the adoption and integration of Uniclass systems and products? And that's certainly something I know that Nathan was involved in heavily at the start. With, I suppose you can't apply it to the whole office straight away. There's a bit of a step change there in terms of understanding. Just wondering how that's carried through in your office at the moment and who's been involved.
Well, Joe, it was quite daunting to change to a full new specification system. We quickly got our head around how Corus used, especially with your help with all the onboarding and everything. Especially there's also with the systems and products and how it's all related and linking that through with the Revit as well. It's good working with Source and Corus with all the products going into Source and us getting a knowledge of what is there and what products we use. And how that is intuitive and a lot more intuitive than a word-based program where you're doing a lot of jumping back and forth between things. We're able to keep our initial specs at a kind of a high level, and then as we move through the progress, through the project, we get more in-depth with our specifications.
Yeah, I think I remember some of those sessions we had, and I suppose it sounds easy when you say it to somebody, but then actually getting into those products and systems can be a bit more daunting because there's so much to choose from. You know, with building products and systems, there's a lot that you can find within the Uniclass range. So as understanding that, I think I described to you, it was a case of thinking that when a trade comes to site, it's not just an example of a door. You don't just install a door leaf. Actually, got to install the architraves, the hinges, some of the door handles, the door closers, whatever it might be. Similar with internal walls, you don't just pin up a piece of plasterboard. You're pinning it to the stud work, and behind that, maybe putting insulation in. There's the sealant of the head and the foot details, that kind of thing. So it's probably understanding that a system is made up of products, and you can search any of those at any time. And like you said, keep it quite high level if you need to. But I remember your colleague Mark was involved as well, Mark Gifford, and I think you guys got your heads around that pretty quickly because it helps the younger staff as well to imagine what they're designing and how that gets installed. So have you found that your staff can kind of improve their construction knowledge a bit from thinking of the products made up of glass systems?
Definitely. I think, look, from a quality control and compliance perspective, it's very difficult to expect everybody to have that knowledge at their fingertips and really be on top of it. So we have sort of certain areas of specialisms within the office. So Nathan sort of heads up that side of the business. So having somebody with Nathan's expertise and experience who can sort of oversee that and really make sure that all the content in there is correct, I guess deals with the quality and the compliance side of things. But the fact that it's all inbuilt there in the system means that, you know, junior staff and new members of staff and people who are just sort of getting to grips with the way that we operate have all that information at their fingertips from the get-go and have that exposure to it, whereas typically it wouldn't be afforded to everyone to have that exposure to it, not necessarily to be able to edit it. I think having specific people within the office who can control the editing side of it is critical, but just having that exposure to the content certainly educates and informs younger staff and new staff to the business from a really early stage in the project.
I think I remember sometimes you're using the search function and a lot of results would come up, which is kind of daunting, but at least shows you there's lots of different interpretations of that search word. So it can sometimes mean that you're at least seeing what a lot of the other options are at the same time. So yeah, we're glad that's worked out well. So our next question, has using Nbs Source and Corus improved your workflow and specification process on the projects that you've implemented it on?
Yeah, there has been, Joe. Using Nbs Chorus and Source means that our specification writing is more integrated during the documentation process rather than put it together at the end of the project. It's helped our staff get a greater understanding of how the whole project comes together. As you just mentioned, we've seen a bit more specification as our younger staff are documenting. You learn on the job a lot more with what parts and what products need to be thought about early on rather than jumping around at the end trying to find the information. We're able to upskill our staff a lot quicker with this sort of information than we would have previously with a Word-based document. Junior staff, as you mentioned, have seen the specification come together much earlier in their careers, rather than it only being the senior staff in the office looking at the specification. And we've been able to upskill a lot of our mid-tier staff with the specification writing process as well.
Yeah, it sounds pretty clear on what I've in my sort of career experience. Certainly, I didn't have any exposure to specs, certainly to my late 20s, which looking back now seems quite bad. I suppose it's been good for your younger staff to at least understand what a spec is and contribute to it. They're not necessarily going to control the whole thing straight away, but the graduate staff can contribute some of it, and they shouldn't ever be detached from the spec. You've still got a designer there design the building, so if they're inputting to the spec as well, that must be quite important.
Yeah, and I reckon it's probably streamlined the DD process as well, because we're now designing with that information at hand from the get-go, rather than just putting in what you think might work, and then later on to find that the material you specified is non-compliant or it's been discontinued or whatever, and there's a component of reworking that's involved there. So we're able to sort of navigate through that with a bit more confidence from the early stages.
Yeah, sure. A little bit about the model integration. Particularly, I'm sure you've got some very talented modelling staff who are creating your designs there and then, but how's that helped them with integrating the actual model plugin, putting their input into the systems and products?
Yeah, well, it's still in the infancy in our office with model integration. It is helping not only with the basic bones of the specification being put together as we start the initial documentation, but also making our staff think about the system and the products earlier in the job, as we mentioned earlier, especially also with ever-changing requirements to achieve a building permit these days. Things are changing almost month to month on occasions. So it's just keeping up with that information which is in the spec, and we're able to link it back to our Revit model as we go. We know that the specification will be updated as we move through the project. And we need to be thinking about our fire and waterproofing requirements from the start rather than sort of midway through the project these days. And model integration definitely helps and prompts our staff to keep these sort of ideas at the forefront of their mind while drawing our models, rather than just leaving it to the end or doing it separately. It's all sort of at the same time.
Have you found they've used the live links of standards sometimes? Often in the products and the systems, you'll have a link to the standard, and it takes you to the publications page of NBS just to show what that standard is. So have you found your staff are a little more aware at least of the standards that are involved in that particular system?
Yes, definitely. We do use that quite a lot now. Just as we're putting the products in and the systems and going, here's the standard, especially with our junior staff, sit down and go, this is the standard we're going to meet to get our building permits, and obviously for our construction, and works quite well.
Yeah, good to hear. Our question number 6, just about what's your take on the changing landscape of construction specification, sort of looking to the future? I suppose you can easily look to the past as well to see there's been quite separated and segregated documentation now, and then it's moving into more connectivity now. And what do you think the future will be, and how will CHT be looking at that?
I mean, it's sort of similar to, I guess, the move from AutoCAD and Word files into Revit and to more sort of integrated workflows. So, for everything from design through to spending your time on site, it seems like most of the sort of digital evolution of our processes are all sort of geared towards, I guess, those early stages of design, and it's not really until now that we're starting to see that impact of the digital era, I guess, on specification writing, and also being on site. Like, you don't have to walk around site with a folder full of A3 drawings and an A4 400-page specification, trying to leaf through and find the appropriate component for that discussion with your site foreman. That everything's now digital and sort of interlinked. I'd imagine it shouldn't be too far in the future where everybody's just walking around just with a tablet, and you can sort of flick through your model and pick up your specification for the specific thing you're looking at on site at that time.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose with everyone broadly working from home for the last kind of near a year, it seems kind of tough to have that same one-to-one contact with some of your younger staff. So they're having to kind of learn at home a little bit isolated. Do you think the connectivity will kind of help them there in terms of them having more to juggle, perhaps with the drawings and the schedules and the specs all at once, but they need that sort of upskilling of their own career and the kind of mentoring, I suppose, as well, from having their own development from these this connectivity?
Yeah, I think so, and certainly the fact that it's all sort of becoming much more centralized now as well. You're not relying upon opening up several projects or programs and searching through a million different folders to find the information.
Right. One further question. So, in terms of project work coming up, either someone that's current using Corus right now or intending to use Corus in the future, have you found ways that you're slightly deviating from what we first demonstrated to you, or finding some other innovative ways to use Corus and Source? How are you looking at that for your future projects?
Yeah, definitely. We do have our masters set up now for each of our sectors that we work in. It's definitely not the original Corus that you showed us through, and we've kind of customized it quite a bit to what we want to see, what our builders we work with want to see, and our suppliers, and what information they can provide to us as well. So we have done quite a bit of modifying, which is quite easy project with the product, and yeah, it's working quite well now.
That's it, and it's probably sort of sector specific as well in terms of the masters. But as Nathan sort of touched on there, we do a lot of work with the same builder or the same client, for example, and you can start to tailor your specifications for them when you know what types of products they like, etc. It sort of streamlines a lot of the thinking.
Yeah, I guess just to expand on that for everyone who's in this meeting as well, the masters are quite handy to save as typology-based sets of information. So you might have done your aged care project or residential project previously, and that kind of gets saved up into the master folder, separate from the projects. So if you've got a very similar project coming up, you can effectively drag that down from the master, and it's kind of pretty much ready to go. But it'll also be tailored to what an aged care building might be, so it's always going to have the relevant systems and products already there. You might already have the exact manufacturer details there as well in that project. So we're finding that companies set that up in many different ways, just having different typologies that they work on. Things from a couple of years ago they might want to still dig up. So I'm guessing you're finding that easy to resource that when you need it, and therefore you're a bit more organised in terms of having a few people stewarding that master's content.
Yeah, much better. And look, I mean, with the scale of the projects that we work on, you know, the teams are getting larger. You have people sort of coming in and dropping out as you sort of, you know, as you adapt between different projects as they go on hold or come back live. So just being able to have that continuity of information is pretty critical for our quality control.
Yeah, it's here. Cool. Right. I think we can move on to the questions and answers session now.
Okay.
So I shall invite Michael to come back in. Hi, Michael.
Thanks very much, Joe. A number of questions have come through the chat, so let's just kick off with them. The first question, and this is a recurring one, I've also sent to my mobile phone too. A lot of people on this call are sole traders. They are architects who run their own architectural firm and practice, and again, they're not the big end of town. And so for smaller firms and for architects who work on much smaller projects, and this is a question that Troy's put in the chat, he says, look, what are the benefits of using NBS as a small sole trader? And for those who might not have historically written their own specifications, might have outsourced it perhaps to an external spec writer, what would you do in terms of recommending the process to transition to an NBS platform on that small side of things?
Yeah, with the acquisition of spec packs I mentioned earlier, we have speed spec content and spec pack content. So the speed spec is sort of smaller end of projects, so probably looking at around $5 million value or a little lower. And that's pre-made, it's kind of pre-set up, it's ready to go. As if anybody's used that in the past, that is kind of a content set that's ready to go as is. But you can add to it, of course, with products and systems, as we've said before. There is still the integration with NBS Source. You can directly copy those products with all their details directly into speed spec or spec pack. So those content sets are definitely catering for the slightly smaller end of town, whereas Uniclass is perhaps maybe looking at sometimes international jobs or larger jobs where it's often client driven as to when they want that produced in Uniclass. So I guess has that been your experience as well, Mark and Nathan, with client requirements in terms of which content you use?
Definitely, yeah. We have been using the speech back a little on our smaller projects, and then Uniclass on our aged cares and some of our high-end apartment buildings.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit more I think, tuned into that kind of size. I should also mention, Michael, we have a sort of full onboarding process that takes place. So when a subscriber signs up with us, certainly as Nathan had learned before, we had quite a few meetings at the start. Some things you didn't understand was just a quick phone call or quick email. But with the spec pack content and speed spec content, we have a full hour training session just to get subscribers fully on board, is to understand how all the functionality works. And that can be just looking through all of the content first of all, and learning how to amend it slightly. And therefore, as I mentioned before, saving it into a master's folder. There's lots of different options that the subscribers can use, but it's good to see a company deciding how they want it to work for them and then sort of organising that content as necessary.
Thanks, Joe. You talked about Uniclass. Do you want to just explain to us a little bit more what that is? Just a couple of people are just asking for a bit further explanation on that term.
Yeah, so from a very simple, broad overview, you have systems and products in Uniclass in terms of our architectural projects. There's many other tables that cover all sorts of things right up from a whole district level or activities being done. So you can really branch out much further than just the systems and products, but broadly that's what we use for construction projects. And as you can see, the SS and the PR denotes whether it's a system or a product. In this case, hopefully you can understand that the product makes up the system, or the system is made up of several products. What that kind of translates into is being able to annotate drawings. So in this case, I've just taken a disabled bathroom. So you can see that there's various systems and products labeled on here. It has the full title and the code of Uniclass, but we're finding that you don't, obviously not intending to memorize those, you don't need to know those so clearly. It's still a case of searching in the Uniclass library and finding what fits. So when you're on Corus, there's a guidance panel as well, which is really helpful. So when you're searching for something, you can just click on it to get a guidance pop up, which will tell you broadly what this covers, and therefore you can kind of understand whether that's going to be right for you. Just onto the next slide, I think I have as well. So this one, so we skip through those. As you can see, for example here, a door assembly system or a carpet tile system is made up of lots of different products. So as we were saying earlier, it's a bit of a step change in terms of just putting something into your spec and thinking that's my product that I want in. You're specifying a system. So a door assembly system here is made up of the wood door frames, the door leaves, the wood mouldings, the latches, all these things. Similarly, a carpet tile made up of the actual tile itself, then carpet gripper strips or floor threshold strips or tile paving studs you can sometimes have in. There's a bit of understanding there just to see that it's systems and products, but it can be used at the early stage of project right through to hand over to your client. So the kind of life cycle is quite useful there, because this is a set classification of Uniclass. It's not going to change. It's designed to be expandable, but as well as being a case of everyone reading from the same sheet, really. So it shouldn't allow any misinterpretation. You're not having to learn codes from other companies or learn everyone else's interpretation of a product.
Great stuff. Thank you. Okay, going back to the questions, this is an interesting one, and it mentions about speed spec and also about speed pack. And the question from Kathy is, what aspects of those two elements remain, and how do they transfer into the integration with ArchiCAD and, say, Revit?
So the content from spec pack or speed spec is still as it used to be. If subscribers know that in detail, they might have been working that for many years. So that content still comes in exactly as it used to be. It's just put onto Corus so that you can duplicate clauses or extend them or add extra rows and things like that. So the content itself doesn't change. And in terms of the integration with models, yes, you can still apply a connection from one of the clauses into the models. So I work mostly with Revit, for example, where you embed the prefix and the suffix, as well as the code and the title into the object. And therefore, you can choose which one of those gets shown on annotations or through schedules. With speed spec and spec pack, you can associate at the overall section level. For example, the doors, you might want to annotate that this is a door and then point that in the direction of that section of the spec. But it's a bit better to then go right down to the clause level and create some materials or components, and therefore you associate with that exact clause, and it pushes the sort of parameters of that clause describing a door directly into that door. So it's forming a better connection. It's probably useful for subscribers to have a quick look at the YouTube videos that we have. There's quite a few of those on the Nbs Australia YouTube channel, and yeah, certainly good to get in touch with some of the people asking the questions to have a run through with them if they need it.
Does it work both ways, Joe? So, for example, if you put information directly into Revit, does that go into the spec, or does it only spec to Revit one way, so to speak?
It's from spec into the model. So it pushes one way.
Yeah. So how are changes managed and communicated to stakeholders, to builders, considering current discussions on live content, access via iPad on site? I'm just reading this question from Kathy again. How are changes communicated on the platform to other stakeholders across the process?
So in terms of regulation updates, do you mean, or changes?
It's mainly sort of, builders and other people that will have access to the design project from start to finish.
And what we're finding is it's really useful for subscribers to invite consultants or even contractors or clients to the project so that they can see what is currently in the spec. They can be added as an administrator or a contributor or a reader. So there's different levels of permission you give them. And therefore you can use the spec notes panel on the right-hand side when you're using Corus. And that's where you can communicate with each other, ask perhaps your structure engineer to complete a certain clause, or ask somebody to verify a certain clause. So there's lots of communication and collaboration you can do on Corus, and certainly that's providing a lot of a much faster way to kind of get the results and get the answers you need.
One of our viewers today is a supplier of architectural products to the architectural profession, and the question is, as a supplier, are we notified when architects are specifying our product ranges?
Yes, there's a product analytics page. So that would be in Nbs Source. And yeah, you can find out when your products have been specified and get a few figures on that. I think it gives you the exact project that you can dig down into. So yeah, there is that functionality. There's a few graphs showing there how many times you've been viewed on Nbs Source, and then how many times you've actually been imported into a spec. So it's quite handy for a manufacturer to see how they're doing on that.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. A question from Mark on the chat. They're coming through thick and fast, these questions. Under what conditions do you use supplier-specific content rather than generic content? You know, for example, your example earlier where you talked about wall or door specs. What's your answer on that one?
Well, you can bring in the exact sort of technical data from source into your spec. That integration, like I say, takes all the parameters directly into the clause in Corus. So there's not going to be any sort of missing information there or any sort of misinterpretation. That should sort of solve the exact product that you need by putting it straight in. Like I said, you can leave the content as it is or create new clauses to add those products in, and that allows you to then create sort of schedules and things or the output into Excel spreadsheets to then see what you've got in terms of the products. So I'm not sure if that answers it correctly, is that?
Yeah, well, if it's not answered, we'll definitely get another question hitting us in the chat. But Daniel wants to know, look, can Nbs Chorus work with other model classifications other than Uniclass? Can it, for example, work with Omniclass? Can it work with, say, Uniformat?
Corus just uses Uniclass, and therefore spec back and speed spec is slightly separate to that as well. So not Omniclass or the other one, no.
Okay. And when specifying a system, say an architect goes in, they specify something, what happens when a system or a brand, an organization, a company, whatever it might be, isn't loaded into the Nbs platform? I mean, how often is Nbs updating the libraries to ensure that it's current?
The Uniclass content is updated every 3 months. So we have two guys who are up in Newcastle, New South Wales, and they're the technical team who are constantly updating the Uniclass content. That's really, really important, crucial work that they do. And those updates also are in keeping with the UK sort of stewards of Uniclass. So they're constantly sort of working together on that. In terms of spec pack and speed spec, yeah, that's updated, I think, around every 9 months to 1 year. So those updates will come through. Particularly with the Uniclass set, you get the option to accept the updates or changes. There's a sort of particular page there where you can accept the changes. And then with spec back and speed spec, when you click on the live links to the standard, it takes you to this publications page that I think I mentioned earlier. It tells you if the standard is current with a little green dot to say yes, this is the current version, and it will alert you with an orange little icon to say there's newer versions might be available. So you do have that choice whether to stick with the previous standards when your project has just started. You might need to stick with those, or you can adopt the new ones.
Okay, thanks, Joe. A question that's come in from Ian. He says, look, does Nbs offer product stock availability information? I mean, there's been a huge amount of issues, as we well know, across the built environment and, of course, the architectural profession about supply trade issues, you know, products stuck on ships coming from overseas. Is there any information on availability of product being one of the key issues that we face at the present time?
Yeah, I saw the stories. Yeah, pretty worrying, really, worldwide. There's no function to update instantly as to whether products are in delay or not, but we're constantly in touch with the manufacturers that have signed up to the platform. So first, when they're getting their products listed onto Nbs Source, we're obviously getting all that information put in. But they can obviously be in touch with us at any point to say we're having production issues on this. So there's always the scope to add that into their product listing and kind of communicate that through the platform. But yeah, it's a sort of certainly a current question that I think that we need to look at closely as well to see if that can be an alert of some form. But at the moment, yeah, we just have the products and the manufacturers listed as they are.
Okay, thanks for that. Look, this is becoming a very competitive marketplace, and there's been a number of questions. You know, how do you compare to NatSpec? What's the difference between you and NatSpec? What's your response to those sort of questions?
Well, we know NatSpec has been around in Australia and very popular for many years, and their content is obviously very valuable to the industry. This is a slight sort of step change away in terms of the connectivity, I think. So the content, as we said, is on the platform and ready to be used as is. And it's been, you know, certainly trusted in the UK for many years in terms of the Uniclass content that the guys are working on. The spec pack and the speed spec content is brought in exactly as it was when we adopted that company. So yeah, there's certainly two different ways to go down with that route, but our content is certainly trustworthy and has been applied to many projects in the past. We certainly will be working with NatSpec at some point over the next few years to see how we kind of line up together.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you. Now let's talk about the business side of things. If people are interested, what's the annual subscription package? Do you have a different level of subscription for different size organisations? How does it work?
I personally have the figures exactly to hand. The speed spec and spec pack is around a sort of $1,000 mark, I think, per year annual subscription for one seat. So it operates in terms of licenses. You have one seat or 5 seats that any person can use at any one time. So speed spec is around about that, whereas spec pack is a little bit more, probably about double that, I think. So there's different levels according to how many seats you have, but I think it's probably best if I swerve that question slightly and make sure I get it authentically from them.
No, that's fine. We will say that Crystal, who is working at the NBS, is currently putting some material in the chat at the moment in terms of the plans and features in there. So if anybody is interested, click on the chat. You'll see that Crystal has put those a link to the NBS's website in there for that. Look, a few more questions coming through. Can the NBS Uniclass format not be applied to small scale projects as well, rather than a seemingly bifurcated approach, speed spec versus Uniclass paradigms?
You can still use Uniclass, of course. Yeah, I think with Mark and Nathan saying they applied the Uniclass set from a more high-level approach. So it still works if you're specifying an internal partition wall. You can still use that in Uniclass for sure. I'm a big fan of Uniclass, and certainly where it's used in Corus is much easier for me to understand because I work with it nearly every day. So it's certainly good to have a small chat with somebody to just go through how that works. But yes, it can be still applied to any smaller projects. It's just sometimes seen as a far more in-depth library. There's literally thousands and thousands of systems and products that you can specify, and therefore it goes to such detail. It's sometimes seen as easier to use speed spec or spec pack, but yeah, it can be used for smaller projects, no problem.
Okay. Giles, who's on the chat, wants to know if it's possible, Joe, to identify elements of the model that aren't connected to a specification section within Nbs Chorus.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to associate everything in terms of the model and the specification associations. You don't need to connect everything. There is a really handy model checker in the plugin where the plugin analyzes the model to show everything that's in there in terms of the objects, and it will show the unassociated items with the associated items. So the associated items are ones you've actually connected already. But you don't have to do everything. Of course, you're just going to be associating things that you want to actually specify exactly. There might still be many things you'd leave to contractor's choice that you don't need to be too accurate about. So there's flexibility there.
Great stuff. Thank you. That's it for the questions, Joe. You've answered them all very well. Thank you very much. And you've done very well for us firing questions at you, and of course everyone on the chat, and of course me. Thanks you for that. Just another question that's just come through. Sorry, you're not getting off just yet. Have there been any teething problems with small-scale builders and literacy with new spec reading competencies? That's a question from Ian.
Sorry, any problems with
with teething problems with small-scale builders and literacy, with specification, reading competencies, etc.
I'm sure Nathan and Mark could give a sort of live kind of opinion of that as well. But we haven't found any problems so far. No, I think perhaps historically the specification is often a bit ignored until you desperately need it. You'll look at the drawings, interpret what you're building, and the spec comes much later. No issues in terms of the content we've found. It's intended to be easily understandable. The spec is just the written version of the project, whereas the drawings is the visual version of the project. So yeah, it seems to have been fine so far. And any big problems, we'll have to let you know.
Okay, no worries. Thanks very much. Okay, that looks like it is the end of the questions that have come through. Every time I say that, another question will hit the inbox, but we haven't had anything come through yet. So we might just leave it there. If people are interested, of course, go to www.thenbs.com.au. Nice and easy to remember, thenbs.com.au. And we have, of course, Crystal on the chat here and of course, Joe. Thanks very much for your efforts today to take us through the platform. Of course, Mark Sprague, Director, and Nathan Bryan, Senior Associate at CHT. Thanks very much for your presentation to us as well. So that concludes our Lean In for today. I hope you have found that of interest and value. And of course, if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You now see on your screen the email addresses for Joe over at the NBS, also the details there for Mark and Nathan at CHT Architects here in Melbourne. So until next time, we look forward to seeing you at a future Lean In, but hopefully you've found today's presentation from the NBS very handy. I've been your MC, of course. I'm Michael Linke here at the Institute of Architects. Thanks very much for joining me. Look forward to seeing you again at a future Lean In. Until then, do stay safe. See you all very soon.